And my father's name is actually Joseph Rosenblatt. He was named for Yosele Rosenblatt. My grandfather was Yosele Rosenblatt's oldest son, Samuel Rosenblatt, also the author of the biography of Yosele Rosenblatt, and that makes me the great-grandson of Yosele Rosenblatt.
All right.
And just so you know, my father likes to say, Yichus is like a potato. The best part of it's underground. So we don't sing.
Awesome. Okay. So can you please tell us basic information about Yosele and where he was from, how he was raised, and his upbringing, really?
Yosele was born in I think town in Ukraine called Bielotchorko. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He was a child prodigy, and according to my grandfather, when he was a little boy, American boys play cops and robbers, they play firemen, whatever it is. When he played, he would take his mother's apron, he would put it over the bench in their kitchen, he would have his friends stand around, and he would play chazan, and they would play choir. That's the story about Yosele Rosenblatt. By the time he was 8, he was already singing. I wouldn't say professionally, but he was singing for audiences, and apparently he was so talented that he made the Tsar a little nervous, so they had to kind of leave there. And he then, I believe, went to the Hasidic court of Munkach, which was maybe a little bit too strict for him. And then ultimately, then the next stop was Presburg, which is now Bratislava, which is in the Czech Republic, or actually it's in Slovakia. It was then Slovakia, went back and forth between Hungary. He served the court of the famous rabbi, the Schreiber family. The great Hungarian rabbis were Rabbi Moses Schreiber, the Chatam Sofer, his son, Rabbi Binyamin Shmuel Sofer, the Ktav Sofer, and then his grandson, the Shevet Sofer. And so the Shevet Sofer was the chief rabbi of Presburg at that time. And then he moved to Hamburg. They were in Hamburg for 6 or 7 years, maybe. And then they left Hamburg in many ways for financial reasons. But and my great-grandfather was supporting many relatives at the time. And Hamburg was also a very confining place artistically. The Germans were very regimented and had very particular ways of doing things, and they didn't like when people cried. And so he wasn't allowed to do the krecht in his davening. And so then he was recruited to a synagogue in New York City, Oheb Tzedek, the first Hungarian congregation.
So I did prepare a couple questions for you, but when I was talking with Henkes, and now that I've actually met you, I can understand you're a big talker.
Yeah.
So he just told me to ask you what you thought about Yosele Rosenblatt, just simple enough.
I came to be a fan later in life.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, there was a preference for the I don't know, it's more the silvery voices of Mordechai Hirschman was a big family favorite, and David Reutemann, and the 78s were constantly going, and we had the Rosenblatt stuff too, but for some reason it struck me, his singing struck me as being that sort of a to me it sounded like it wasn't free, and
he was forcing it.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, and it made me uncomfortable. I just had it for some reason. I just didn't react well to the sound. I could hear what an incredible chazan he was and all. But as I learned how to sing myself, and I grew and I matured, I realized why he was Yosele Rosenblatt. I came to appreciate this instant connection. At the minute you hear his sound, you think prayer. and even later on, I realized what a master singer he was, and his agility. It was a big voice, and unbelievably agile, and how he could go through the registers from head register to chest and back without a break. And but the most important thing is the sense of tefillah. You get tefillah, prayer, when he davens. It's my mom. He was the one guy that my mom immediately would start crying when he opened his mouth and sang something. And he was a wonder. He was a wonder.
If I recall correctly from when I read the book,
Mm-hmm.
I think he learned from the Chazan in Bielachurko, and it was basically through the nusach of the shul. But I don't think he apprenticed with anybody else, not that I know of.
Okay. So in terms of musical performances, was he mainly in the sacred texts of musical performances, or did he ever dive into non-secular, secular music? And
so some of his recordings include, like, there's a one called Eililu, which is a Schluftzijn. It's a lullaby. So there were a couple of things, but he was mainly, I would say 95% of his things were liturgical pieces.
Got it.
He may have done meditations on things which were not typically liturgical. One famous one is Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Chanina Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. That's really the end of a study piece in the synagogue. It wouldn't be something that is very that would typically be sung, but he developed it. My cousin, was a rabbi in Riverdale, believes that it was about the lost Jews, because it talks about prat hayotze min haklal, the specific that leaves the generality. In its original context, it's about an exception in a biblical verse. But my cousin thinks that it was an interpretation about the individual Jew who leaves the greater community. Well, that's speculation.
Okay.
He did spend time in actual composition. He was very famous for a falsetto voice and for the breadth of his range. In Hamburg, he was known for transferring to a major key, as opposed to a lot of things that were in sort of more minor keys, because the Germans wanted something that socially Germans were not. They saw themselves as upper crust. They were not the Polish, Russian Pale settlement Jews. These were bankers and shippers. Yeah, they were blue blood Jews, and so they hired the best chazan in the world, but they wanted him to do something in a style that was a little bit different.
All right. Tell us about the chazan's time in America. How did he adapt? Did he change his style?
So this is not my expertise in terms of his style. What did change in America was that he went on this tour of after the World War I. There were a lot of displaced Jews, there were a lot of impoverished Jews, and they started a tour, the Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael tour, right? Our Brothers All Israel tour. I think the first venue was the Hippodrome in Philadelphia, and it sold out. And then they did Madison Square Garden, and then they did Chicago, and it was this tour that brought him great fame. In fact, it's some time ago at auction, I managed to get a hold of this, which is a print of a piece of his music inside. Hesitant to take it out, but it's for the Jewish War Orphans Fund, which I'm assuming is the same body that the concerts were for. And that really projected him onto a much larger stage, and he was one of the first recording artists for RCA Victor. And so, it's an amazing thing. Every congregant I have over the age of 70 will eventually clean out their apartment, or their children will cclean out their apartment, and everybody comes by and they present me with a set of records. Say, Rabbi, I don't know if you have these. Here's some Yosele Rosenblatt LPs. Now, there's a guy in New York, with relatively low budget, he took all of these recordings and remastered them and compiled them with a computer compilation, I guess a Fourier transform kind of a scenario, and he created a much cleaner and better quality version now under the label Od Yosef Chai, which is much better versions of the Yosele Rosenblatt recordings. So you get some of those.
Awesome.
And the one thing I guess which is important subsequently is that almost all chazanim, especially for the high holidays, are using a base of Rosenblatt's Lekel Orech Din, Rosenblatt's Hineni, Rosenblatt's Unatan Tokef, and those become sort of the basis off which everybody else is riffing, if you will.
Everybody copied him. I mean, he's the one that started to put in that a little tune, a metric tune amidst the non-metric chazanut, what we call recitative. Towards the end of each piece, there'd be a tune, and so I guess he was the progenitor of congregational singing in a way, because everybody knew those tunes. I used to work as a waiter on the Lower East Side. 2 restaurants. One was a dairy. They were both dairy restaurants. One was very famous, Ratner's Dairy Restaurant on Delancey Street. But around the corner, there was a lesser known restaurant called the Grand Dairy Restaurant on Grand Street. That was a gem of a restaurant. And I would be waiting on tables, and I had regular customers. One guy was blind, and so you had to put the food a certain way, and you learned, that. And I guess someone had told him that I was like 18, or someone must have whispered in his ear that your waiter is studying to be a chazan. So he says, "Come here, kid." And I say, "Yeah." He says, "Moide ani lefonecha." I go, "Yosele." And then he goes, "Oh, I'm impressed." He goes, back to eating, which is from Elohai Neshama, which comes at the end of his Elohai Neshama. Moide ani lefonecha, Hashem Eloikai veloikei avoisai. My mother could do that krechts, that particular krechts. She was Sai Ribon kol hamasim, Ribon kol hamas, Adon kol haneshamos. Accompaniment. Bam, 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 bam. Then he would go into this wild head voice, which I was not blessed with. I don't have a good falsetto.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
I never did, and it's been the bane of my existence. I can't even do a proper coloratura when I'm in it. I don't call him the shine for. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away.
What I do know is that he was a bit of he was a celebrity in a Jewish sense. No, but it's like not just a macher, because if you met a macher's grandson, it would be okay. Your grandfather put his name on the shul, right? That's a macher.
Yeah.
There are people who, like, I meet in Israel, they want to kiss my hand. He's a great grandson of Yosele Rosenblatt, right? So the genetic material I have from him is 12.5%, whatever it is, right? But that sort of celebrity was this sort of otherness about him. I have people tell me that when they were a little child, their brother put them on their shoulders and took them to a Yosele Rosenblatt concert so that the little ears would have the pleasure of hearing Yosele Rosenblatt's voice while he, the Friedricher Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, was asked, was offered to hear Yosele Rosenblatt. Now, he may have been being polite, but the way the story goes is he refused because he said, "I'm not zeicha to have such a tanag in this olam," right? Which means I'm not I shouldn't be privileged to have such pleasure in this world. I'd be taking it for my share in the world to come. So those kinds of things were said about Yosele Rosenblatt. That sort of creates a bit of a celebrity culture, competitive nature, something like that.
Awesome.
So my understanding was they each snuck in to hear each other's performances. That's the family legend, that they each appreciated the other.
So Yosele was I mean, he was the chazan that everybody knew, and not just Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew him. There's a famous picture of him with Al Jolson, and
well, the most famous one would be his relationship with Enrico Caruso. Right?
Yeah, and Charlie Chaplin.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Charlie, there's a great picture of him in the book that the son wrote. One of the sons, who became a rabbi, wrote a really a lovely biography of Yosele, and there's a bunch of great pictures, and there he is with Charlie Chaplin, shaking hands with two, I think there's a Caruso picture there too. They say when he worked in Harlem, I think Caruso might have had a Passover Seder with him.
Wow.
And also the Harlem jazz crowd used to go and hear him daven. There's a Cab Calloway sings a Yiddish song called Atazoi. It's on the album called From the Avenue A to Second Avenue or something. There's 2 discs.
Okay.
CD, and in there is Cab Calloway doing this Yiddish song, and in the middle it calls for chazanas. No words, just or whatever he was doing, la la la, but chazanas. Calloway does idiomatic chazanas, really good chazanas, to the point where I just did a sample, just him singing the chazanas, and I played it for a cantor friend of mine, a good cantor. I said, guess the chazan. So he says, oh, it's Quarton? I said, no, it's Cab Calloway. Because he probably listened to Yosele.
Mm-hmm.
Ornette Coleman, the legendary jazz man, talked about Yosele being one of his greatest influences. That he had a friend in Chicago when he was younger. He says, you got to come to my basement and hear some stuff. And he played him a recording of Yosele singing Tikanto Shabbos. It was from the Shabbat morning Musaf. And he said that song, just that recitative or whatever, he could never get it out of his head. He said something like he truly spoke to God or something, all kinds of quotes.
He felt it.
There was a New York Times deal about that.
Wow.
So Yosele was, and so many people try to imitate him.
Couldn't quite do it.
Yeah, my wife's grandfather could imitate Yosele to perfection. He had a great voice. His name was Joseph Rakuzin. And Columbia was recording Yosele in a Yom Kippur piece from the what's called the Avoda service. It's called V'chachaya Omer, which calls, I think it's Baruch Shor as the composer, which calls for a big male choir. So it was a choir of chazanim, who knows, 50 of them, and Yosele singing. So Yosele came up sick, and that's the day they had to record it that day. So Grandpa Joe, Freda's father's father, stepped in and did it. And if you look in the archives, as a matter of fact, it's one of the cuts on that same album that Cab Calloway is on.
Okay.
And I think it's titled Vehakohanim. And there's it says Rosenblatt, but then if you look in the liner notes, it says something like unknown for the cantor, because if you go into the archives of Columbia, it says unknown.
Wow.
And it was Grandpa Joe.
But it sounded like him, eh?
Yeah, I once had a a real fight with somebody a chazan who sang in Yosele's choirs. He goes, "That's Yosele." So I'm telling you, it's my wife's grandfather. No, it's Yosele. That sort of thing. They the people in those days. The people were rabid fans of, just like fans of baseball today. You know, just like fans of Beyonce or whatever.
Hmm.
Rabid. And if, no, Yosele was the greatest. No, Hirschman was the greatest. And fistfights would ensue. My father was such a Hirschmanite. I mean, you better not say a bad word about Hirschman to my father, or else you were in jeopardy of getting your nose broken. So, but my mother was a Yosele. That was her guy.
I was talking with his great grandson. It's actually amazing to hear the legacy that he actually passed down because, Rabbi Andrew Rosenblatt, he went to Mea Shearim one time, and scholarly men who were double his age were coming up to him and kissing him on the hand because he had the bloodline of Yosele Rosenblatt 4 generations down. That's the one story that just got me going.
I understand that. The first time I met Jerry Glantz, the son of Leib Glantz, in Florida, he was giving a lecture. There he was, standing, the son of Leib Glantz. I had to kiss his hand.
Mm-hmm.
I had to, because I wanted to be close to Leib Glantz, who's the most unique of all cantors. Yeah, I get that totally.
It's amazing just to think of the power, I guess, that it shows down the legacy.
Yeah, Yosele was this incredibly decent, good man. He never said no. People wanted money, and he had fortunes, and he lost them. He made a bad investment, I believe, in a Yiddish newspaper. Was it? I'm not sure, but he lost like over $1 million back in the 30s and the 20s. That was
a lot of money.
It's like 50 million today. So he had to go on the road and do the vaudeville circuit. This guy was a pious guy. When it was time to daven mincha, and if the sun was going down, he'd be in a car. He'd say, "Stop." He saw a telephone. We go to the telephone booth for privacy, and he would daven mincha by himself. He walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk about. He didn't just sing about prayer. He lived it.
Yeah.
So to read about him, it's so fascinating that way.
Andrew was also continuing by telling me about a piece that he wrote, a composition he wrote. He actually went to Hamburg and bought this on auction, like an original composition by him about the orphan fund that he was donating to. And there was one time he told me he was in Chicago, or I can't remember which city, but there was a girl who had typhus who really wanted to come see him in concert but couldn't.
Yes.
And after, he actually went personally to the person's home and did a full concert, the whole thing for her over again. So it shows that he was very pious, man. Very, very good man.
Yes. So there's, I could see a great play, on Broadway. Incredible life story. One of my students at HUC did his master's thesis on Yosele Rosenblatt, and the musical portion of the thesis was the recital was a play about Yosele that he wrote, which was quite good.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I worship him. I actually saw his handwriting once. Very interesting. He had an acquaintance of mine had come into possession of his entire Shabbat repertoire, and that's called his apatatura. I don't know what language that's from even, but Hankus would know. Mm-hmm. His apatatura means his collection of recitatives, and it had everything from Kabbalat Shabbat L'chuna Ranana till the end of Musaf Aleinu Shabbat. It was all there. Everything was said and notated in a very good handwriting. Yes. Terrific sight reader. I understand could sight read like the wind. A lot of those guys could. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my teacher Moshe Genshoff sight read like that.
Awesome.
Yeah. They would sight read at performance level. you know, and that's amazing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Takes great skill to be able to do
Yes,
that.
yes,
I play the violin, so I understand. Like
yes,
it's very difficult when you given a composition just to
yes.
go on it. So
Yeah, at performance level.
yeah,
In
that's
other words,
awesome.
they could cite not only do a composition, but improvise on it while they're doing it and looking at it for the first time.
Pretty amazing.
That's how these guys. They were nuts. These guys.
Almost a
Yeah.
different class.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
There's some great stories. I'll give you a couple. One is that on his last Shabbos, he gave a very powerful musaf. It was the day that Olozarov was assassinated, and he gave a very powerful musaf in the Chorva synagogue in the old city. And he, there were people who had thought that Yosele Rosenblatt has a tuning fork, and they went to accost him, and they reached into his pocket after shul, and they pulled out a bottle of water. Why did they pull out a bottle of water? Because when he would daven, he would put up his talus, and maybe he would touch his hair. He'd adjust his talus, touch his hair, and touch your hair. You're really supposed to wash it until Sedai. He didn't want to interrupt Musaf, so he would use a little bottle of water to, if he touched his hair. There are other stories like he was once at a leper colony, and there was they had these things up in upstate New York. People were covering whatever, and somebody walked in late and needed a minyan, and there was no minyan to be found. So apparently Yosele sat down at the piano and started to sing, and until the 10th man came and he clapped on the piano and said V'hu Rachum, and they davened Marav. And there was one girl, I think, who got typhoid fever or something like that, and she missed a concert in her town when Yosele sang, and her mother came and was so distraught, and apparently Yosele went to her bedside and redid the entire concert. And then there's also there's other funny stories. The story from when they moved to Hamburg, when my great aunt Nettie, who was the fourth child, was born. So the social inspector came to the house and said that Mr. Rosenblatt, you have to leave Hamburg. He said, why? He said, well, you've now had your fourth child with Miss Kaufman, and you're not legally married. He said, he pulls out the ketubah. He says, well, this is my marriage document. She says, we don't recognize that here. We only recognize, a wedding blessed by our emperor, Franz Joseph. So they traveled to Amsterdam, took a boat to London, and got married to avoid the scandal.
So Hengist tells me you're a great impersonator. I was wondering if you could give us an impersonation of Yosele.
That's my morning voice. Let's think. Let's think. Ad sheloi noitzarti, ad sheloi noitzarti, eni chedai.
Oh